What's going on out there, people? Jason Aponte, joined by Vish Kumaran of Blake and Vish Sports. Vish, what's going on, bro?
What's up, bro? It's been a while. I actually have stopped going on other people's streams, not because of I just haven't had time to do it, just because I'm supposed to be right now focusing on figuring out how to get a job next year when I graduate from college.
Right.
But when you asked me, Jason, that's what I've said no to some people. That's why I wanted to come out here and be upfront. The job search is still important. But when Jason Aponte asked you, there's no way. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Of course you got to say yes. I'm on with Jason Aponte.
A once in a lifetime, this guy. But I appreciate you, Vish, for coming on. But realistically, why I asked you to come on is because there was a discussion on 49ers Twitter, and no, it has nothing to do with the tracker that Trey Lance wore.
No
it actually
way.
Has,
Jason, come on. We're not talking about Jimmy Garoppolo versus Trey Lance. Why did you bring me on here?
No, we're not going to be talking any of those things. Realistically, today, PFF, who has done a great job of stirring the pot, putting up things with no context, did a great job today of giving us a choice, and it opened up a larger discussion, right? So today, PFF drops a graphic of who is the greatest receiver of the 21st century. And I want to make sure I get all the choices correct. So Terrell Owens, Randy Moss, Larry Fitzgerald, Calvin Johnson. Who else am I missing? Marvin Harrison,
Antonio Brown, Julio.
Chad, and Julio. Okay. All really good receivers, all of them, right? So I want to start this off by starting continuing a debate that's been happening on 49ers Twitter or just regular football Twitter, okay? Because Vish said he's going to go off. I'm going to let him go off on his thing first. I mean, a second after this. But I'm going to go off a little bit about the Terrell Owens, Randy Moss thing a little bit. Listen, I am also telling you that this comes from a pretty biased place. Terrell Owens is my favorite receiver behind Jerry Rice of all time and one of my favorite players of all time, right? But just because of Randy Moss's, I guess, highlights, somehow it's almost a foregone conclusion when you talk to people. They'll say, man, it's Moss over Owens. I don't know why you know what? If you prefer Moss, that's fine. But I don't know why it's such a slam dunk Randy Moss over Terrell Owens thing. And I just want to start strictly with the numbers, and we'll get into the debate, okay? So for everybody who's wondering, they played the same amount of years. Randy Moss played one less game. Terrell Owens played one less game than Randy Moss. One. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, or do I have it backwards? Oh, no, Randy Moss played one less game than Terrell Owens, okay? Let's just go through the stats real quick. Receiving-wise, Randy Moss, 982 receptions. Terrell Owens, 1078. Yards, 15,292 for Moss. 15,934 for Terrell Owens. Touchdowns, 156 receiving and 153 for Terrell Owens. Terrell Owens also has 3 rushing touchdowns. Vish, if we gave this to someone who never watched football and we told them these are stats, judge who you think either of these two better players would be or who had a bigger impact, what do you think they'd say?
Say they're dead even, which to me is the correct answer to this question. And I talked a little bit about why I'm going to go off. Obviously, these are players that are a little before my time, though not really. Because I did watch Terrell Owens on the Eagles. I watched him on the Cowboys. I watched him on the Bengals. I watched him on the Bills. I watched Randy Moss on the Patriots. I watched a little bit of Randy Moss on the Raiders. I didn't watch Randy Moss on the Vikings, but I did watch him the second time with Brett Favre. I saw him on the Titans. I saw him on the Niners. So, I grew up watching these players. I was a little bit younger, but I still did watch a lot of them. So the first things first I want to touch on, because I saw this circulating on Twitter, it really ticks me off. And I think it's fair to say that I'm mostly objective when it comes to the 49ers, even though they're my team. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. As long as it's not Deebo Samuel.
You're funny. But what I was going to say was I always see whenever Randy Moss is circulating on Twitter, it's always people trying to be the smart guy that says Randy Moss is the GOAT, right? There's certain sports conversations like this one that do require debates. There's also certain sports conversations where there is an obvious correct answer. And you don't have to show that you're smarter than everybody else for thinking differently. Like, the best defensive tackle in football is Aaron Donald, okay? You don't have to be the smart guy that says Fletcher Cox or Grady Jarrett or DeForest Buckner or Chris Jones, because they're not the best defensive tackle in football. It's Aaron Donald. Just like that, the best receiver of all time is Jerry Rice, okay? There should be no debates about this question. I don't understand why people say Randy Moss is the GOAT, all of that. Oh, the West Coast offense. Who did Randy Moss play for in his first 7 years, Jason? Denny Green, who's a protege of whom? Bill Walsh. What type of offense did Randy Moss play in? The West Coast offense. Oh, but Randy Moss, he didn't have the quarterback play. Well, Randall Cunningham was pretty good. Dante Culpepper was pretty good. Yeah. And he played with Chris Carter on the other side of him. All he does is catch touchdowns, Chris Carter. Oh, Randy Moss, deep threat, physical ability. I've never seen anybody outside of Darrell Green run down Jerry Rice. I don't know what physical ability we're talking about. With the ball in his hands, this might be the fastest player in the history of the NFL. He's better after the catch than Randy Moss. He runs a more variety of routes than Randy Moss. He has more consistent hands in traffic than Randy Moss. Just because Randy Moss was a better, maybe deep threat, he was not a better all-around wide receiver than Jerry Rice. And this all-around argument all stems from the fact that Jerry Rice has been marketed as a non-physically gifted athlete because he ran a 4.6 40, though I can't ever find the story, but I do remember Bill Belichick talking about this 40 and saying that there's particular circumstances with which why it was a 4.6 40. For example, he ran it outdoors, uphill, against the wind, and it ended up being 4.6. Now, Jerry Rice isn't as fast as Randy Moss, but I guarantee you Jerry Rice is 4.35, 40 yards on the field. Nobody could catch him. Right. So I think that's where this debate stems. So I wanted to touch on that because the real debate really is Randy Moss versus Terrell Owens. Somehow Randy Moss has been kind of put on a pedestal that puts him a spot above Terrell Owens and right there with Jerry Rice. When really it's Jerry, then it's Terrell Owens and Randy Moss vying for 2. And you could put other guys in that conversation, honestly. But so let's talk about the 2 of them. Today, I saw your tweet, and I was shocked. People are like, oh, it's Moss. It's a foregone conclusion. Based on what? Based on what? Like, I don't always use the numbers argument because I do think quarterback play, physical ability, all of that is taken into account. But, like Terrell Owens, who did he have? Yeah, he had Steve Young at the beginning of his career. Jeff Garcia. I'd take Randall Cunningham and Dante Culpepper over him. I'm sorry. What about him having 830 yards at the age of 35 with the Buffalo Bills with 8 games of Trent Edwards and 8 games of Ryan Fitzpatrick? What about him in Dallas with Tony Romo? I thought Tony Romo was a hell of a quarterback. Honestly, outside of Steve Young, I think Tony Romo was the best quarterback he's ever played with. Better than Donovan McNabb, in my opinion. Easily. That's how I feel about it. But if you go down the list, I don't understand why. I think it's biased maybe because Terrell Owens is looked at as team of like the guy who ruins teams and all of that. But then I don't understand why that argument isn't used because Randy Moss quit on his team in Oakland. And that's been well documented. And you can, I don't understand why people just say Oakland, because if you go back and watch Randy Moss's 2010 season, the last season before he sat out a season and came to San Francisco for 2012, he quit on the Minnesota Vikings and he quit on the Tennessee Titans. You can watch Randy Moss quitting routes on tape. It's there. So I don't know. I was never in a locker room, so I don't know what's good for a team, what isn't. But I don't think in any type of sports I've played, my team quitting would be good in any sort of way for the locker room. So then I don't think off the field is part of this. Then on the field, was Randy Moss faster? Yes. Was Randy Moss the better deep threat? Yes. Was Randy Moss more agile and like graceful in the air? Maybe the most graceful receiver since Lynn Swann? Probably. All of those things is yes. But there's an entire aspect of Randy Moss's that doesn't exist, and nobody ever talks about it. The middle of the field. 3rd and 7. Are you throwing the ball to Randy Moss with the game on the line over the middle and having him take a hit for that first down catch? Because you're going to Terrell Owens in that situation. Heck, Terrell Owens is probably catching that football, breaking 3 tackles, and taking it for 30 yards. But that aspect of Randy Moss's game is totally missing, which is why when we talk about like the GOAT debate and all of that, like what are we talking about here? We're talking about complete football players. Randy Moss had an entire aspect of his game that was missing. Jerry Rice had no weakness to his game. Randy Moss was never the best middle of the field wide receiver. That's why people like Marvin Harrison, and Isaac Bruce and stuff get underrated over time because those guys were more complete. Now, Randy Moss might have been the most dangerous receiver in NFL history. He's without a doubt a top 3 receiver of all time. He might even be 2, according to me, honestly, but I don't understand why people automatically put him in front of Terrell Owens. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and you kind of just made my point that I was going to make, about talking about the more well-rounded receiver is Terrell Owens and sneaky fast, right? He didn't really blow people away with his straight down the line speed. Right, but I've never seen Terrell Owens get caught by anybody in the open field. And when you're talking about other things, like you just said, walking off the field, all that stuff. Sure, T.O. did a bunch of things in the locker room, outside of the locker room that I will not defend. But on the field, Terrell Owens is going to give you 100%. Randy Moss would not be able to come back from a broken leg and pull up into that Super Bowl and do what he did. He didn't just show up to the Super Bowl and say, hey, I'm here. I'm a decoy. He was the best player on the field that day, even better than Tom Brady in that game. And if they would have won that game, I 100% agree with what Terrell Owens said after that game. If I was Brett Favre, they would have built a statue of me and put it in front of the stadium for what I just did. 100%. But none of that ever gets talked about. The narrative is shifted. One more point that I'm going to make about Terrell Owens and Randy Moss. At the end of Randy Moss's career, Randy Moss was cooked. It was done. It's over. Terrell Owens, we all know why he didn't get signed somewhere else, but he definitely still has some in the tank. What did he have? 80 catches or something like that in Cincinnati at the end of his career? He had more in the tank. He could have played 3-4 more years. So when you look at these stats and they have the same amount of games, you talked about it. In Oakland, as soon as things go wrong, done. Not playing anymore. Don't want to do it. I don't care. He goes to the Patriots. Cool. He breaks the record for touchdowns, and he's reinvigorated because Tom Brady was incredible that year. They won every single game except the Super Bowl. But when you look at one game difference, we're talking about 100 receptions, and we're talking about 700 yards. Now, he has more touchdowns, and that's a credit to Randy Moss because of how he gets it down the field. But those numbers dwarf those other numbers, and it speaks to the more well-rounded wide receiver. Clutch moments, the catch two, the 20 catches on Jerry Rice Day. For the people who told me that Jerry Rice was double covered all game, I throw this at you. Why wasn't he double covered every single game then, and then Terrell Owens would have had 20 catches? Anybody will say anything to discount Terrell Owens. It's always something else to discount Terrell Owens and what he did. Oh, he had 20 catches on Jerry Rice Day because he was double teamed. Oh, okay, so that's the first game that Jerry Rice was ever double teamed?
But nobody says anything about Chris Carter?
Dude, and that does
touchdown?
Right. And that doesn't help, that he had that. Look, listen, if you want to argue physical gifts, I don't think that we can argue physical gifts, God-given physical gifts. I don't think that I'm here to argue that because that's true. One thing that Terrell Owens did above Randy Moss was work harder than him, work much harder than him. Randy skated by on his physical gifts for a long time, and that's how good his physical gifts were. But Terrell Owens works his you still can't convince me that right now we can get Terrell Owens to be somebody's third receiver, pull in 25 catches, have about 275 yards, and maybe 2 touchdowns in a limited role.
So I don't want to get to the work hard thing because I think Randy Moss can also be misleading in terms of how hard he worked just because he's such an effortless athlete. I'm sure Randy Moss worked hard, though. Terrell Owens, you can obviously see the work he put in. You can see the body transformation of Terrell Owens throughout his career. The man became yoked, and he definitely got faster, too, as his career went on, and more explosive and more twitchy. All of those things are true. One thing I did want to touch on is why this argument is so selective. A few weeks ago, we were talking about wide receivers on my channel, Blake and Vish Sports. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Also subscribe to Jason Aponte right now if you haven't. Thank you. Shameless plug. And I mentioned that Tyreek Hill was the best wide receiver in football. And I mentioned it in passing, and people gave me pushback on saying that. They were like, no way. How can you say that? The same argument that a lot of people make for Randy Moss is the exact argument for Tyreek Hill today. He's the most dangerous football player in the NFL. He gets vertical. Devontae Adams is a more complete wide receiver than Tyreek Hill. True. DeAndre Hopkins is more complete than Tyreek Hill. True. Michael Thomas maybe. True. You can go down the list, but who's the most dangerous out of all of them, Jason?
It's Hill. And you're talking about game changer stuff.
Right. So then why do we make that argument for Randy Moss to say he's way better than Marvin Harrison, way better than Terrell Owens, but we don't make it today for Tyreek Hill? Doesn't make sense to me. Doesn't add up. And then the off the field stuff, I never understand why we don't use it for everybody. I feel like it's selective with T.O. And, you touched on it where, like, if somebody else had played the Super Bowl on the broken leg, like, it would look very different. And people just didn't like Terrell Owens. He rubbed people the wrong way. But the excuses that are made for Randy Moss, I find them hilarious because Terrell Owens did play with Tim Rattay. He did play with Jeff Garcia. He did play with Trent Edwards and Ryan Fitzpatrick, right? And Randy Moss did play with Tom Brady. And Randall Cunningham was a good player. And Dante Culpepper, before he tore up his knee, was a very good quarterback. He had a, 39 touchdown season in 2004, 2003, yep. Dante Culpepper?
It was after he jumped on the Madden cover. That was it. That was what kind of put him out. But he made Madden cover because of that. One thing that I think you're bringing up, and I think that is something else that needs to be discussed, is when you talk about whether you're putting somebody over somebody, do you value peak seasons over longevity? And for me, that's a tough one because if we want to switch it to another discussion, let's just say running back, right? Jim Brown doesn't have years and years. Emmitt Smith does. But you'd be hard-pressed to find people that would say that Emmitt Smith is the better running back than Jim Brown. Jim Brown just left on his own terms, which is why I see people talking about Megatron, in here. But again, what do you value? Do you value the peak? Megatron dominated, but only for a few years. A guy plays longer and accumulates more stats. That kind of holds a little bit more water in my book when it comes to that. You can't burn bright and then go away. That's that. I mean, look, Megatron left on his own terms, and the Detroit Lions sucked the life out of him, and that's why he left. But it's all about what do you value? Do you value your peak or do you value longevity? And for me, the whole story, and you just talked about it, Cincinnati, 81 catches at the age of 37. This isn't a guy who's just like hanging around on the field. This is a difference maker. 81 catches, that's a difference maker. Again, didn't get signed again because the league decided this is it, we're done with him. But it's unreal the things that people use against Terrell Owens but don't for other people. And whenever T.O. did something wrong, it just completely knocks him down on this list. When you look at pure numbers, he's basically right. He leads them in receptions and yards, and he's right there in touchdown receptions. And let's do a per game basis, per game. And this is how dead even. I think this is the real dead even argument. Per game, 4.5 receptions for Randy Moss, 4.9 for Owens, 70 yards and 72 for Moss and Owens, and the same exact touchdown rate, a 70% chance of scoring a touchdown in every single game, man. I think that's it.
Yeah, I definitely think that's fair. And, we've been a little bit negative on Randy Moss, and this isn't just Randy Moss. Obviously, both of us think Randy Moss is one of the 3 or 4 best receivers in NFL history. I think he's probably second. Like, if you gun to my head, I'd probably take him over Terrell Owens. The shocking thing for me is why people don't think this is a debate. Because to me, this is as big a debate as anything in sports. Like, this is not one of those definitive, like, Jerry Rice is the GOAT. To me, that's definitive. If you say anybody else, I don't know what you were watching or why you went by it, because there's no argument for me on why Jerry Rice. Like, he has everything. But Terrell Owens, Randy Moss, to me, I don't understand why there's this subjective pedestal for Randy Moss to put him in places where I don't get why. Why is Randy Moss put in the conversation with Jerry Rice? Honestly, like, I understand the physical gifts argument, but the physical gifts argument doesn't get taken into account in every single facet. If we took the physical gift argument into account, Aaron Rodgers and Dan Marino should not be below 5 as they are in most people's top 10 quarterbacks list. Why are they below 5, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, they're below 5 because Marino's never won the big game. Rodgers only has 1. Other guys have won more titles. There's always more context to why somebody's over somebody else.
Same thing with Brett Favre too, right? If this is a physical gifts argument, Brett Favre is as physically gifted a quarterback as we've ever seen in the history of the NFL. And he also has the longevity numbers that are right there with the Peytons, the Breezes, the Bradys, and all of them. So then Moss's raw numbers are up there. So then why isn't Brett Favre ever in that conversation with the Bradys, right? He should be there the way Moss is there with Rice. It just makes no sense. I think there's this obvious subjectiveness to ranking in sports, as there should be. But sometimes I think the arguments people make are just emotional and illogical. I don't understand them. I just don't understand them. Honestly, I don't understand how people take Randy Moss, take him past T.O. automatically and put him in the conversation with Jerry Rice. I don't get it.
I think that it has a lot to do with impact. And what I mean by that is there's a whole new way to describe somebody jumping over somebody and catching a pass. How do you call it? You call it being mossed. Like, that's the sort of thing. So I think that a lot of the impact and the things that seep into the culture, right? Like, Randy Moss kind of mirrors, for me, Allen Iverson in a lot of ways, right? Where Allen Iverson comes in and his impact is different. He starts moving different, like with the way that he's dressing, and he becomes the face of a generation. I think that's what Randy Moss kind of did with a lot of people. And I also agree with you, man. People are too rushing to try to be the smartest guy in the room by saying, Randy Moss this and Randy Moss that over everybody else. But I think it has to do with impact. Like, there's literally a term for when somebody jumps over somebody and makes a catch. It's called being mossed. It's not called being Owens. And all that stuff can get in the way of your objective thinking, because you're starting to think about impact. You're starting to think about all those highlights. All I can see right now that we're talking about Moss is the Thanksgiving game against the Cowboys. 3 catches, 157 yards, 3 touchdowns. That's incredible, man. Like, that is incredible.
They showed on the Cowboys game is a rookie because they passed on him. I thought you were talking about the one where he moons Lambeau and Joe Buck. That's despicable. That is despicable.
I loved it. I was like, Joe Buck, shut up, man. And then we find out that Joe Buck's been drinking in the booth the whole time. So it's like, whatever, man. Nobody cares about that. But no, I think that a lot of it has to do with the way that people view him. He's an icon to a lot of younger football players, right? And whereas Terrell Owens was always in that discussion, but it was always like, bro, look at Moss. They went 15-1 that one year. He's dominating. He's doing this and that. But when you look at the numbers are strikingly similar, with Owens having the edge in many of the big cumulative numbers, and he's played one more game. Remember, T.O. broke his leg in that Philly seasons, and he was already on pace to destroy records. He would have had over 2,000 yards that first year with Donovan McNabb. He was going insane. And then you talk, and this is another reason that I keep nudging T.O. in front of Moss. I know for a fact that T.O. could have played 2 more years, and maybe he wouldn't have had 80 catches, but he would have been highly productive. We know that when Randy Moss was on the 49ers, he was there selectively on the field at times. He wasn't that game changer that he was. Not that T.O. was, but T.O. was still very, very, very productive, and Randy Moss was just not at that point. And remember, he took a year off and then just joined the 49ers again. So there's a lot of layers to the story, and there's a lot of things that people forget. And I think that's the part that kind of, like, when you think about, all right, I don't want to project what could have been, but I know T.O., if he would have been allowed to come back to Cincinnati or join another team, he would have had another 60 catches.
He did get that shot in Seattle, if you remember. And he had a poor preseason in Seattle. Oh, he still had the really sick over the shoulder catch where he literally caught it. It was Willie Mays, but he fell over doing it, leaning all the way back. Well, it's still a ridiculous catch. Seattle preseason. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. One of the best catches, honestly, of Terrell Owens' career. But I don't know. I don't know why people don't debate this one. I really don't. I don't understand it with Randy Moss. And I get the cultural argument, like he had a cultural impact. But I don't think that the cultural impact is given to every athlete. You know what I mean?
Oh, I don't know about this one. I mean, T.O. never walked off on the field. T.O. never stopped running routes.
Why? Because the media says Terrell Owens or Randy Moss was a better teammate, but nobody.
Randy Moss left the field while the game was going on. He took routes off. Terrell Owens never took a route off. If he did anything wrong, is that he slandered his quarterbacks more than anything. So,
but you want to say that's my quarterback.
Yeah, but he loved Tony Romo too. That one's the one that I don't really jive with. That's another thing that kind of knocks Randy Moss down for me. It's like, yo, Randy Moss, and people want to use that as a positive when I brought that up. Oh, well, think about the numbers he would have had if he would have played hard. No, that's a negative. He clearly didn't play hard, and you recognize that. That's a negative. That's not a positive. That's not a positive.
Right. What was I saying before that? My bad. I'm
sorry.
My bad. Before you. No. I actually had something to say.
I blew it. I'm sorry. I just saw it.
No, you're good. You're good. What was I talking about, though? Someone tell me.
That why you don't understand why it's not more of a hotly. About impact, about cultural impact, and about Randy Moss, and why that.
Dude. Yeah, if we're talking cultural impact, when I was growing up, the guy with the biggest cultural impact, and this was before he had the off the field situation, was Michael Vick.
Yeah.
But we don't ever put Michael Vick in any sort of conversation, even though he was a true icon.
Yeah,
Michael Vick always had the biggest naysayers.
But I think that, like I said, a lot of what comes out of this discussion is like people are always pointing out like the highlights of him like jumping over people. Yeah, those are great. Those are great. But that's not how you paint the story of a person's career. That's not how you want to do your comparisons. Those are
you know what I think it is? My bad. Excuse me. Go ahead.
You're good. No, you're good. You're good. I was done. Yeah.
You know what I think it is? I think it's those highlights. People romanticize Randy Moss based on the highlights. The Dallas game, him mooning the Packers fans, all of that. People romanticize him based on that. With T.O., people remember popcorn, Sharpie. That's my quarterback working out in his driveway
and standing on the star.
Right. So those are the ones that really make. I think that's what really makes the difference, because how you remember them, I think, is really important. I think that with Randy Moss, you remember this like once in a lifetime athlete, and with Terrell Owens, you remember kind of crazy human being.
One more thing that I wanted to point out, because it's crazy, right? We're talking about playoffs and everything, and I just talked about, the catch-2 happened in a playoff game. T.O. did what he did with in the Super Bowl, but here are their playoff numbers. This is like really, really dead even. Check this out. Both had 54 receptions. Moss had 977 yards. T.O. had 751. Moss had 10 tutties, and Owens had 5. Now, if I didn't tell you those blind stats, you probably would have said right off the rip, like, yeah, T.O. probably dwarfed a lot of his numbers. But you got to remember, Randy Moss is in a lot of playoffs with a lot of teams. And I didn't realize it was that close. And they're that
good football teams, too.
Yes.
Those Viking teams were good. Really good.
15-1. And if the greatest kicker of all time doesn't miss that
Gordon
one
Anderson.
kick, that one kick one time, they probably go on and roll on Denver. I mean, I don't know, man. Like, they were unstoppable that year.
Yeah. Not to mention, he also played on the undefeated Patriots, he also played on the undefeated Patriots. But yeah, honestly, they're the two greatest receivers I've ever seen personally. I didn't watch Jerry Rice. I watched those two. They're the two best I've ever seen. I think that one is pretty much set in stone. They were both outstanding players. I just don't get why one is definitively thought of as better than the other. I think it's a conversation at the very least.
Yep, and to put a bow on this, the next topic was going to be who you would choose out of all of them. So it seems like you're good with Moss, and that's fine. That's fine. But I wanted to switch gears to this one. So we named all those.
We can still talk about it though, because there's some things I do want to mention.
Okay, go for it.
So it is Randy Moss, right? It is Randy Moss to me. It's not that close, but if you want to do a ranking of those guys, I have a little bit different take, because I'm not the highest person on Calvin Johnson in terms of the all-time list. And let me tell you why. It's not that he isn't an all-time great receiver. I think people romanticize his physical gifts and how dominant he was for 2 seasons as what he was for his entire career. And if you actually look at Calvin Johnson in his entire career, especially if you look at the deeper level statistical analysis of Calvin Johnson compared to the Randy Mosses, the Jerry Rices, the Terrell Owens, the Larry Fitzgeralds, all of them, this is the single most inconsistent receiver in the history of the NFL. It's not history of the NFL. Single most I blew that. But single most inconsistent all-time great receiver in the history of the NFL. If you compare him, so a friend of mine, he's at RMEQ something on Twitter, but he goes by Cash, and he and I like deeper level statistical analysis. So he did for me, and I looked at it. He did a per game, 16 game by 16 game yards per game average basis on the careers of Randy Moss, Calvin Johnson, Terrell Owens, Larry Fitzgerald, all the all-time great receivers. And what he did was he had a running average through 16 games. So he basically was able to get their yards per game average every 16 games in their career. So 0 to 16 yards per game. 1 to 17 yards per game, 2 to 18, and so on and so forth. And he went all the way through their entire list of games to have the number of this is Mark Espinoza says, you look at DK Metcalf. I mean, first of all, DK Metcalf's comparison, we'll get to him. I don't know why people sleep on him. Andre Johnson is what DK Metcalf is.
Hold up, save
That's
it.
That's who
DK
DK Metcalf is, but I'll save it for later.
Also, I just wanted to say, because Pinor, damn, you guys were arguing that whole time to just say Randy. I said T.O., and I'll die on that hill.
I said Randy.
Yeah, I'm gonna die on that hill as the biased 49ers fan. I don't care. I'm not being
my problem was that people acted like this wasn't a conversation. To me, this is a major topic of discussion. I personally would take Randy, but it's like I'm taking Randy, and tomorrow if you woke me up, I might take T.O. It's like that. But what I wanted to touch on with Calvin Johnson, it's really a very inconsistent stretch, because if you go through his career and you go through the 16, those 2 years that Calvin Johnson was really dominant, we're talking about the 122 catch.
So what? Yeah, I got it right here. Were you going to read it off?
The 1,900-yard season, right? The 122 catch, 19-yard season. That season, he could have been the MVP in football, right? He had just 5 touchdowns, but 122 catches, 1,964 yards. Crazy, right? And the season before that, when he had 1,681 yards. His only 2 seasons, by the way, where he had more than 1,500 yards receiving. Randy Moss, on the other hand, only had 1. And Terrell Owens had none over 1,500 yards. So, again, how special was Calvin Johnson those 2 years? There you go. Like, he was unprecedented in NFL history. Here's my problem with it, though. If you go through the entire list of Calvin Johnson's career, and it's not just the beginning, right, when he had John Kitna and Drew Stanton and Dan Orlovsky playing quarterback for him. Once Matthew Stafford really became Matthew Stafford and had the 5,000 yards, 40-plus touchdown season, right, we can talk about system. I agree with it. Calvin Johnson was never put in a great offensive system that fully utilized his full skill set. And we're talking about one of the most athletic freaks in the history of the NFL. I buy that argument. We can talk about a lot of different things that factored into this, but I liked his quarterback. I liked his quarterback, frankly, more than almost every quarterback T.O. played with. I liked him as much as every quarterback outside of Brady that Randy played with. So
I won't fight you too much on. I won't fight you too much on that one. I think that Romo kind of gets slept on because
Romo is definitely the only one to me that's in the conversation. Right. I like Stafford more than McNabb. That's just me.
I don't really think that that's too much of a discussion, honestly.
But what I wanted to say was, in terms of yards per game, if you go through his career, it's so inconsistent with Randy Moss. I've gone through his game log. I've never seen a guy have 185 yards, 30
You mean
yards.
Calvin?
165 yards, 32 yards. Who did I say?
You said Randy Moss.
Excuse me, I meant Calvin Johnson. It's so weird to me. And that's where I think it becomes a conversation of you look at 6'5", 240, 4.37 speed, and you're like, wow, freakiest of freaks, dominant football player. All of those things are true. But then at what point does the conversation become when you look at Antonio Brown and you say, well, he's 5'10", 185, only 4.5 speed. But I don't think there was a game between 2012 and 2018 that I didn't turn on the Pittsburgh Steelers and I didn't think Antonio Brown was the best or the second best player on the field. Antonio Brown didn't just beat the best corners of his era. He abused the best corners of his era. And he beat Jalen Ramsey in that season that Jalen Ramsey was the first season he really was put on the scene with that defense. That Jacksonville defense, Antonio Brown abused Jalen Ramsey both times that season.
And again, it goes back to your peak or your longevity.
But that is a peak, right?
Right.
That's a 6-year peak.
It is. And for the time that you're talking, 1681, 1964, 1492, and 3 straight years for Megatron. But game to game, and the only reason I know this is because I'm a fantasy football nerd. You know, when he blows up, he wins you the week, but when he doesn't do anything, you lose the week. And those peaks and valleys are tough. They're tough to get through in fantasy football. Not that that matters or anything like that, but
it's not just that. Like you look at Antonio Brown, like I'll never forget it. Do you remember the no-fly zone defense? Yeah. Chris Harris Jr. had not given up a touchdown in 2 years. Pittsburgh Steelers went to Denver that year. Antonio Brown had 10, 120, and 2 touchdowns on Chris Harris Jr. So to me, it becomes a conversation because you can go back and find Calvin Johnson versus Darrelle Revis, and Darrelle Revis had his way. Patrick Peterson did a hell of a job. I remember one of those years on Calvin Johnson. There were corners who did have games where they did well on Calvin Johnson. I don't remember a corner having a good game against Antonio Brown besides Jason Verrett the one year he was healthy prior to last year.
Yeah, that was it. And remember, look, not to take anything away from Jason Verrett, who was the quarterback in that game? You remember?
Right?
No.
Oh, no. Was it Charlie Batch or one of those guys?
Michael Vick.
Dennis Dixon. Michael Vick. Okay.
Michael Vick at the end of that time, so that's not Michael Vick Atlanta time. So listen, yes, Verrett one-on-one, he was locking up Antonio Brown, and that's what we really got excited about because I remember that game. It was a Monday Night Football game. Remember they won on the Le'Veon Bell Wildcat play that they had on the last second. Yeah. So that was Michael Vick. That wasn't Big Ben. Not that probably would have changed anything because he didn't have anywhere to go. Verrett had him that entire game. I'm glad you brought that one up, actually.
Yeah, that's where I struggle with this entire conversation because to me, honest to God, what I saw Antonio Brown as for 6 years, where I just said, I can't tell you why. Like, this isn't the biggest guy, this isn't the fastest guy, but he is the most dominant football player as a wide receiver. That's what I imagine Jerry Rice was like. Like, right. There were a couple bigger guys, there were a couple faster guys, there were guys who had better height, weight, speed. But the most dominant football player was Jerry Rice. That's what Antonio Brown was for 6 years. He was the most dominant wide receiver in football. And it didn't matter when. He was outstanding after the catch. He was unbelievable. And these are the things that happen because of size, right? We automatically assume 6'5" guys are the best contested catch guys in the NFL. The best contested catch guy in the NFL when Antonio Brown was in the NFL was Antonio Brown. There was not a player that was stronger at the catch point than Antonio Brown. There was not a player better at catching the ball in tight spaces and in traffic than Antonio Brown. So,
no, go ahead. You got it.
So that's where I just sit here and say, like, yes, Calvin Johnson was probably the most physically dominant receiver I've ever seen outside of Randy Moss, probably. Calvin Johnson was one of the best football players I've ever seen, definitely. But to me, I take Antonio.
So no. We're not talking about AB because I pulled up Calvin Johnson. Because look, what I was gonna say is I'm tired of you guys just jumping to DK. Why is it that you brought up DK right after Calvin Johnson when the clear comparison to Calvin Johnson is Julio Jones? It's not DK Metcalf, guys.
You think so?
Yeah,
I don't even know why people compare people to Calvin though.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about stature, being able to run all the routes, all those things. I don't think it's DK Metcalf because he's still not there yet, and that's no knock on him. But the fact that you guys jumped right over Julio Jones to get to DK Metcalf was going to be my next point.
Really? Because I wouldn't compare Julio to Calvin. I would say Julio's way more fluid.
But they do because of the size, the way they move, and things like that. Like, you haven't really seen a big man move like that, like how Julio is. But here's what I wanted to point out. This is a really good one. Calvin Johnson and Julio Jones have played the same amount of games together. The same amount right now at this point. Julio Jones has 135 games, so does Calvin Johnson. Here's the numbers. 731 receptions for Calvin Johnson, 848 Julio Jones. Not even close. It's 110 more receptions with the same amount of games played. Yards. Julio Jones is ahead of him by 1,200 yards. 11,619, 12,896. Now, here's the part that everybody always throws in your face about Julio Jones is the touchdowns. 83 for Megatron, 60 for Julio Jones.
Yeah. So, but one of the things people don't forget is that Calvin, for a 6'5", 240 guy, was never like the league leader. There's nobody that's caught touchdowns like Jerry Rice in NFL history. Right. And you would think Calvin, because of his size and stature, would be a 12, 13 touchdown guy every season. He wasn't. He had seasons of 4 or 5. But
so per game too. Go ahead. Well, one more thing.
Go ahead.
Per
my
game
bad,
two.
Jason. Go ahead. No, my bad. My fault.
You're good. Per game. 5.4 receptions for Megatron, 6.3 for Julio, 86.1, 95 yards for Jones, 86 for Megatron, and 0.6 and 0.4 touchdowns. Obviously, it's going to lean towards Megatron. Same amount of games. Can someone look you in the face right now and tell you that they don't think that Julio Jones is the better player because he's still got more in the tank and he's still going to keep playing? Or are we just going to go off a peak as opposed to a guy who's going to continue to play and build that longevity? And that kind of takes us into the next topic, but I wanted you to talk about what you were about to say.
Also, the 95 games is the most in NFL history on a per game basis.
Yes.
95 yards per game.
95 yards per game. Julio Jones,
that is the most in NFL history by far. Actually, by far.
Yes.
I think everybody else is in the 80s. He's the only one in the 90s. But I don't. So yeah, that I agree with you. I think Julio is definitely in that conversation. I don't know why there's certain guys that get anointed with certain things and certain guys that don't.
He has a cool nickname.
I personally don't get it, but the one thing I did want to mention, Jason, and I think this goes into the argument to the one we were having previously with Moss and T.O., it goes into this argument as well, is one of the things I do look at when I start ranking receivers, and this is probably the most subjective metric I ever use in any sort of anything to analyze anything. So if you want to call BS on it, I totally get it, and that's totally fair. But I always look at it and say, 3rd and 7 when the game's on the line, who's the receiver that I'm going to go to? Who's the receiver that I think can confidently win anywhere, anytime, and is going to catch that football? And for me, of all those guys in that list, you know what name I looked at, Jason, first?
Fitzgerald?
Antonio Brown.
Oh, Antonio Brown.
How many late game situations did we see Tony Totap come through? Or how many late game situations did we see Ben Roethlisberger throw a little bubble screen and Antonio Brown take it 70 yards to win a game? We saw it too many times. Julio's definitely in that conversation for me. The Super Bowl, somebody mentioned it was one of the greatest performances. It was the greatest performance by a receiver. I think Jerry Rice might have something to say about that, but Julio Jones, without a doubt, that was one of the great receiver performances I've seen. Owens is definitely in that conversation. Fitz is definitely in that conversation. But you know who's the two guys I didn't think of in that exact situation?
Who?
Randy Moss and Calvin Johnson.
So let's look, this is a great discussion. I didn't realize that we were going to get so much out of this, and we haven't even gotten to our third part yet. But I wanted to pull up Antonio Brown and Julio Jones. They are both still playing, okay? Antonio Brown has played in 139 games. Julio Jones has played in 135. Antonio Brown has him by 38 receptions, 886 to 848. Antonio Brown is behind Julio Jones. Julio Jones, 12,896 and 11,746 for Antonio Brown. But obviously, Antonio Brown has him in touchdowns, 79 and 60. And if you look at their per game numbers, strikingly similar when it comes to receptions, 6.4 and 6.3. 84 yards per game for Antonio Brown, 96 for Julio Jones. And again, 60% chance that Antonio Brown scores a touchdown, 40% chance that Julio Jones scores touchdowns. And look at that. Again, Julio Jones continues to be looked over. And like, it's so funny because people were going through this and they're like, who's the Titans guy? Oh, you know, I know that he just switched teams, and I know that he's probably on his way on some sort of decline. Right. But the disrespect to Julio Jones is ridiculous. It's just insane to me also. But it also brings up a good point because Antonio Brown was on there. And that is somebody who, at his time, when he was running things, and he was the guy who, like you said, best contested catch, pretty hard to argue at that point. Man, like these are some good arguments. And I will argue this at least with Calvin Johnson and Julio. Julio was definitely in a better offensive system for
that's what I did want to mention.
Yeah.
Julio did come into the NFL. It was like a Randy Moss situation with Matt Ryan and Roddy White. I'm not comparing Roddy White to Chris Carter. I'm just saying he came into a really nice offense that was already functioning without him, and then you add him to it, and it becomes special because he's a freak. Calvin Johnson came to John Kitna, Drew Stanton, and Dan Orlovsky, and all those guys as his quarterback. So that definitely hurt him. And also Calvin Johnson has one touchdown that has not been included in his statistics because the refs decided that the Bears needed to win. One of the worst days of my life, allowing the Chicago Bears to win that football game. I mean, anytime you allow the Bears to win a football game, I'm upset. But allowing them to win that football game, I had a soccer game right after that game. We watched the game, and I'm about to go to my soccer game. I'm all pumped up. I'm going to play great. I see that it gets overturned. Jason, I play the worst game of my life. The Chicago Bears winning affects me that much mentally.
Whew, man, I mean,
I'm joking.
But here's what we'll do. So this has been a great discussion because it's already 45 minutes, and I want you to get back on, looking for a job and stuff. But we do need to make sure that we knock out this last one.
Thank you, Jason.
Okay, no problem.
And we do have to spend some time at some point talking about Marvin Harrison and Larry Fitzgerald. Because the moment we started talking about those other guys, the comment section rightfully talked about those two guys. And I would love to spend some time with you talking about them. Maybe not today.
Yes. So look, underrated or left off the list. So we're gonna start with underrated. It's Larry Fitzgerald is boring. And that's why people don't think of him in that way, right? But if you look at it, when you want to give context to someone's career of who could have done more, I don't think that there's a bigger case to be made for any of these guys than Larry Fitzgerald. You want to talk about bad quarterback play. Jesus, man. I mean, Drew Stanton, him too, Skelton, he had Carson Palmer for a little while. Those were probably the best years of his career. Kurt Warner as well too. Those are the two guys that we could say, but goodness gracious, man, if anybody has ever been held back by quarterback play in this group, it's Larry Fitzgerald. Look, I think the part that about Marvin Harrison that people kind of don't really talk about him is because they're like, man, it's Peyton Manning. That's Peyton Manning, bro. But at the same time, that kind of diminishes Marvin Harrison's value, and I don't think that that's right. People don't want to knock. People can't knock Jerry Rice, even though he was with Joe Montana and Steve Young. But I think with Marvin Harrison, he gets overlooked because it was Peyton Manning, and he was the sheriff at that time. Man, you're talking about the best regular season quarterback, period, probably, like as far as numbers go, right? Like statistically, every year, year in, year out. So I think that's why Marvin Harrison's boring. Larry Fitzgerald's boring. They went around, they just did their thing, they did their business. I'll tell you the one person, and it hurts my heart. The one person that didn't deserve to be discussed with these players that was Chad. On this list is Chad. And I hate to say that, bro. I really hate to say it because Chad was very good at what he did, was on a trajectory to do things. Obviously, that all got derailed, but Chad shouldn't be here on this list. So if you were to replace Chad, if you're going to replace Chad with somebody, who are you replacing him with?
I mean, to me, there's two correct answers. It's Isaac Bruce and it's Andre Johnson.
Yep.
And I did want to touch on Larry real quick because I do think there is an aspect of Larry. So is Larry one of the greats ever? Yes, he's top 10 without a doubt all time. He is a guy who you do wonder if he had a couple more years with Warner instead of John Skelton, Kevin Cobb, Richard Bartell, all those guys as his quarterback, Josh Rosen, you wonder what he could have done. And Carson Palmer obviously came in and rectified that because once they move into the slot, it was outstanding. But here's my problem with Larry. I feel like Larry gets the opposite. Because the rest of these guys are divas and Larry's the consummate professional, Larry, all of a sudden, everybody's like, oh, Larry's a little bit higher than he should be. Larry had one of the great playoff runs of all time. I think Larry is honestly the comparison for Julio. You said Megatron. I think early career Larry and add like a little more speed to that, that's Julio Jones to me. And I don't know if you disagree with that.
It's just the size. I think it's more about seeing a 6'5" man run all the routes and do all. And you're right. I'm not here to argue that Julio's that Megatron's a better route runner than Julio because I don't believe that.
But Julio's 6'3", right?
Yeah, I think so. Right? Is he 6'3"?
Yeah, him and Larry are both 6'3".
Oh, okay. Wow, I didn't know that. That's cool. I didn't know that. Okay, but my thing is I think that when people talk about Megatron, they talk about him in this way. And on that list, nobody was ever saying Julio or anything like that. But they played the same amount of games, and Julio's dwarfing his numbers in almost everything.
And AB, if you want to talk about peak, AB has had a 6-year stretch more dominant than any 6-year stretch of at any point you want to start in Megatron's career. His 2012 to 18 is more dominant. So, yeah, I agree with that. So, yeah, I just wanted to mention that with Larry. But Larry definitely should be talked about more. He is one of the all-time greats without a doubt. I don't know about first ballot Hall of Famer, but if Terrell Owens isn't a first ballot Hall of Fame wide receiver,
see, but you know why T.O. wasn't a first ballot Hall of Famer. That had nothing to do with play on the field. That was the writers sticking it back to him because of what the way he treated some of them, and that's. But
I cannot call anybody. I cannot call Larry Fitzgerald a first ballot wide receiver if Terrell Owens wasn't.
To highlight your point, right? Let's do Isaac Bruce against Chad Johnson. You ready?
Yeah.
Man, this is pretty bad. So, obviously, Isaac Bruce has played 60 more games than him. But Isaac Bruce, 1,024 receptions, 766 for Chad, 15,208 yards, 11,059. Bruce and Johnson, 91 touchdowns for Isaac, 67 for Chad. I love Chad. I love the way that he played the game. I thought that he's going to be super slept on, probably won't even make the Hall of Fame, unfortunately. I mean, unless other guys make it in front of him, then I'll start to really campaign for it. But I think people really forget how good Isaac Bruce really was, man. And I found out a factoid, I think today on Instagram. Isaac Bruce and Tim Brown were the only two players to score their last touchdown against the first team they played for. So Tim Brown, as a Buck, scored his last touchdown against the Raiders. Isaac Bruce, as a 49er, caught his last touchdown against the Rams. I don't know if that means anything. I just thought that was cool.
That's really interesting. I actually remember a lot of Isaac Bruce. He was the best 49ers offensive player outside of Frank Gore because he was on the team before Vernon Davis had the whole Vernon Davis got kicked off the field in Seattle. Can't play with them. Can't coach with them. I want winners. Physical with an F. That entire Mike Singletary rant. So it was really Isaac Bruce and Frank Gore and that Sean Hill offense. And Isaac Bruce was special. Isaac Bruce also was very good before Kurt Warner was even there. So phenomenal player. But really, Jason, I even want to overlook Isaac Bruce. And I want to go to Andre Johnson.
Talk about
Andre Johnson was the best wide receiver in the NFL for years. You want to talk about a guy like – I don't get why we do this for Calvin Johnson, but then we don't do it for Andre Johnson.
Quarterback play, right?
We know, but even team. The Houston Texans' second draft pick in their entire existence in the first round was Andre Johnson, number 3 overall in 2003. And you want to talk about physical freaks? Like, here's the reason I talk about him and DK Metcalf. Andre Johnson was 6'3", 230. You want to talk about a guy that was yoked? Ask Cortland Finnegan how ripped Andre Johnson was. Andre Johnson was jacked. And then he ran 4.3. I think he ran 4.3 coming out of Miami. He ran 4.3. So every physical trait you want to ask, Andre Johnson was really the original beast. And then you want to talk about a guy, his quarterbacks were Matt Schaub, who's the worst guy of anybody in this list. Matt Schaub is the worst quarterback of all these guys that they played for an extended period of time in their career. And that was Andre Johnson's best quarterback, I think, that he played with. Then you look at his first quarterback, David Carr. Well, how could you even expect David Carr to throw him the ball because they couldn't protect David Carr?
Right.
And Andre Johnson, in spite of this, was a 2-time All-Pro, which is pretty good. But he had 2 seasons, just like Calvin Johnson. Calvin Johnson had 2 seasons, right? I talked about it with 1,500-plus yards receiving. Guess how many Andre Johnson had in his career?
Back-to-back, 1,575 and 1,569.
1,598.
Yes, he had 1,598 in 2012. He led the league in 2008 and 2009 with 1,575 and 1,569 respectively, and he still topped that with a career high of 1,598 in 2012. I want to know who led the league in receiving if his career high wasn't good enough to get that done.
In 2012?
Yes.
That was that was probably one of Calvin's years, right?
I'm going to check it out right now. But keep going.
2012 was Calvin's 1900 year, I'm pretty sure.
That's not fair. See?
Yeah. But Andre Johnson did it with who? Matt Schaub?
Yes. And like you said, Larry Fitzgerald gets afforded all the, he never played with a quarterback, but Andre Johnson never gets any of that, and nobody ever talks about him, right?
And you want to talk about the more physical? I think it's because Larry also had the playoff run capped off with a historic Super Bowl performance. Maybe one of, if you want to talk about best Super Bowl performance by a receiver, Larry's is definitely up there.
It's up there, and he almost won that was the game winner, basically. That one that he took to the crib there, man.
And Troy Polamalu, bad angle from center field. You know who wouldn't have taken that angle to the football?
Ed Reed.
Ed Reed. Excuse me. I have a cough, Jason. And also Ed Reed, beginning of his career, did every single thing that Troy Polamalu did in the box and everything. Just wanted to point that out. But just not to be off topic, but to go back to Andre Johnson, I don't understand it. And then the physical gifts argument that's made, we talked about it ad nauseum, right? It's made for Randy Moss. It's made for Calvin Johnson. This is the freakiest. This guy is a freak. Andre Johnson is one of the true freaks that have played receiver in the NFL. And I don't understand because Metcalf, people say Metcalf, Calvin Johnson. Metcalf isn't 6'5". I think Metcalf is 6'3". Andre Johnson it's 6'3", 230. It's the same style of player. It's that physically imposing number 1 wide receiver. It's the guy that's built. It's the guy that runs 4.3. DK 6'4"?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's fair. I get it. I still think Calvin for DK is a little bit rich just because I always looked at Calvin as a more longer-limbed athlete. I feel like DK is cut up to the max, which is what I look at Andre Johnson as. I looked at Calvin as a guy who could probably be 250 if he wanted to. He just played it 240, and he was a really looser athlete. I think Metcalf is as put together as anybody. So that's definitely fair. But I don't understand, Jason. When we were talking, there was a Bleacher Report gridiron thing earlier I want to say it was like a week ago, that asked who's the most underrated receiver in NFL history. I said Derek Mason because I think he's a guy that was really good for a long time that doesn't get talked about. I still remember him in the Matt Stover field goal game that Peyton Manning beat them. Him and Steve McNair, they had a really nice team in Baltimore. But Matt Stover kicked like 3 field goals. I think it was like an 18-6 football game, if you remember, in the playoffs. 2006, I want to say.
Yep.
Yeah, 2006. But no, excuse me. Derek Mason wasn't on that team.
No, not 2006. Wait, what you said about the Ravens?
I think it might have been 2009. I want to say. I'm not sure, but I screwed that up. Excuse me. But the point is, I still remember Derek Mason with Steve McNair on the Titans, and I do remember him on the Ravens. I think Joe Flacco was the quarterback at that point. But overall, I thought he was always a consistently really solid player. But honestly, the most underrated, I also said it was Andre Johnson. To me, Andre Johnson is the most underrated receiver, honestly, in the NFL, if I had to pick one. Like, I don't get it. Every argument that you can make for everybody else doesn't get made for him. I don't know why.
Do you want to do Andre Johnson and Chad?
Let's do it. I doubt it would be close because I remember them in their primes, and nobody in their right mind would say Chad was better than Andre Johnson. Or you weren't in the right mind if you said it.
Yeah, I'm going to check this out right now. So let me pull this up. Chad Johnson. They still haven't changed him to Ocho Cinco in Pro Football Reference, actually.
That's disrespectful.
A little bit, right? That's his name. Chad Johnson. Come on. What's going on here? My iPad's taking a crap right now. But this is a great discussion. And look, for the 49er fans in here, I love talking about the 49ers. I do. But I love talking about football. So that's why sometimes when we do these shows and it has nothing to do with 49ers, it doesn't get as much engagement. I think because we started it with the T.O. Moss thing, it brought people in. But I love talking about this. These numbers are okay. So Andre Johnson has played 193 games. Chad played 166. 1,062 for Andre, 766 for Chad, 14,185 for Andre, 11,059 for Chad, 70 touchdowns for Andre Johnson, 67 for Chad. That's a little bit closer than I thought it would be. Look, I love Chad Johnson. I think that he's one of the guys that nobody ever talks about his football stuff. And that's the part that gets me upset. Like when you talk about football, nobody ever talks about, okay, was he good at route running or anything like that? They always say, man, he did this, he did that. No. We're just talking about on the field. When he's on the field, I implore anybody who has a chance. It's on YouTube. What is it? The Dark Side of the Game. They did it about Chad Johnson, the Vice documentary. I'll kind of open your eyes and he went to college with TJ Houshmandzadeh, and they actually ended both up on the Bengals, and to hear the whole journey from him being somebody who was completely quiet, his mom abandoned him as a kid. It's an amazing story. Chad just gets remembered for the extracurriculars and not what he did on the field. But for him to be on that list ahead of Isaac Bruce, ahead of Andre Johnson, it's a little bit disrespectful when you look at their records. And again, it looked like PFF was picking players who people remember as popular instead of realistically who were the better ones.
And I agree. I don't actually have a problem with it to the extent of, oh my God, like, because Chad was all time for a stretch in his career too. Mm-hmm. Like you could make an argument that 05 to 07 Chad is really there with anyone, right?
97, 14, 32, and 9 in 2005, 87, 13, 69, and 7, 93, and 14, 40, and 8 in a 3-year stretch. He had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 straight years of over 1,100 yards with none of them at 1,500, but 2 over 1,400, and the one in between 1,369. That's
there you go.
So again,
that's a great stretch.
Peak longevity. That's the part that, like, again, when I talk about it. Maybe Randy Moss had higher highs at certain points in his career than Terrell Owens. I gotta the body of work. I
think it's just the 23 touchdowns, but
yeah. But it's the body of work. For me, it's all about how long can you do this, and that's really where I get. But again, it doesn't apply. I don't feel like it applies to all positions, right? Like I said, like I brought up the Jim Brown, Emmitt Smith thing. I think that's a little bit different, especially because running backs need linemen and stuff like that to open up blocks for them and stuff like that. So I think that's a little bit different when it comes to receivers.
I want to ask you a question though.
Yeah,
because I feel like Calvin doesn't just get put into the conversation with Randy Moss and Terrell Owens, where I don't think he belongs. He gets put in the conversation at times where people say he's at the Jerry Rice level. There was a contemporary of Calvin Johnson in the position you just mentioned, the aforementioned position, running back, drafted in the same draft, 7th overall in that draft. Calvin was drafted 2nd out of Oklahoma. That is as physically freaky a running back as I've ever seen in my life. Physically freakier than LaDainian Tomlinson, who was God at the beginning when I started watching football. Sean Alexander, he was physically freakier than. And Sean Alexander had a 27 touchdown season. He's physically freakier than all of these guys today. Saquon Barkley, Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, all of them. But I never see a top running back list where this guy is in the top 3, 4, or 5. And that's Adrian Peterson. And he had his 2,000-yard season, to me, where he won MVP and took them to the playoffs, is every bit as impressive, if not more impressive, than Calvin Johnson's 1,900-yard season. Why doesn't Adrian Peterson get afforded the same sympathy that Calvin Johnson does in these lists?
Is he still playing? I think he's still on a roster somewhere too, right? Yeah, but I see somebody. Ooh, man. So somebody brought up in the comments Anquan Bolden. Anquan Bolden is far ahead of Chad in almost every single
all time. Yeah. But peak, it goes again all-time peak, because peak Chad was one of the 3 or 4 best receivers in the NFL. Anquan Bolden was always one of those guys that was ever reliable. You wanted him on your football team. All of that. You're never putting him as one of the 3 or 4 best receivers in the NFL at any point in his career.
No, but I mean, it is a good discussion because I don't know if they were contemporaries. Let me see. When did they start playing? Yeah,
they were.
They were. Chad started. Yeah, Chad. So Bolden's 03. Yeah, Bolden's 03. Chad's 01. So it's the same thing.
My bad. Excuse me.
No, I mean, but remember, Chad in the beginning, it took him a little while to get going, and then that's once he burst on the scene, it was when he was like gold jackets and all the antics and all that stuff on there too. Fish, it's an hour, bro. We could talk for another 2 hours about this.
Can we talk a little bit more about Andre Johnson before we go?
Go for it. I'm having fun listening to you. Go for it.
Yeah, so I just wanted to touch on him again because it just goes back to I don't know why he's never put on these lists. I understand that his career numbers aren't there, but Calvin's career numbers aren't really there either. And Calvin had record-breaking seasons. I get that. Andre Johnson didn't have that, though. I think Andre Johnson put in a situation with Matthew Stafford dropping back every single time with the kind of arm talent he had. I think Andre Johnson could have had record-breaking type seasons. I mean, the guy was putting up 1,500 yards receiving with Matt Schaub on a run-first offense under Gary Kubiak when Arian Foster was the focal point and Steve Slayton was the focal point and a lot of people like that. So they were running the football. So to me, I don't understand, and I think it's there has to be a point where he is put on these lists, because I think when you're making the physical gift argument that is afforded to Calvin Johnson and it's afforded to Randy Moss and it's afforded to a lot of different players, that same exact argument exists with Andre Johnson. He is as freaky as any of the physical freaks that have played.
Yep, and Andre Johnson played in about 60 more games than Calvin. Okay, so you should credit him for playing longer. How is that something that's wrong? How is that a problem? Because Megatron left on his own terms. Andre Johnson has 300 more catches, 3,000 more yards. He just has 13 less touchdowns. So again, nobody ever talks about Andre Johnson. You know why? He sent out his first tweet, I want to say last year. And
this year situation?
Yeah, and it was this year. It had to do about Deshaun Watson, and that was it. You never heard the man speak. And the only other thing that really gets brought up when you bring up Andre Johnson's name, you brought it up, Cortland Finnegan. That's the thing, and that's the one time that he ever lost his cool, and you probably even knew what he looked like because the helmet went flying off. But it's a great point, Jason.
The other thing is he's the only one on all these receivers we've talked about today that can say that he is the greatest player in the franchise he played for.
Easily.
Nobody else can say that.
Easily.
I guess maybe J.J. Watt for the
Julio can.
You think
Julio
so?
can. Oh, not Dion. Yeah, that's right. Deion's the best. Deion's the best.
I would still give Matt Ryan the edge over Julio.
Really? That's a whole other debate show.
Hey, Matt Ryan was a Pro Bowl quarterback before Julio Jones ever came.
He was. But his best season was under a goat coach, and
Big Golden Nuggets makes a great point. I did forget. Larry definitely has that argument, without a doubt. Larry's without a doubt the greatest player in Arizona. You're right.
He does. He does have that claim. You're right about that. Actually, that's really good.
That's right. That's a great point.
Yeah, because Terrell Owens isn't the best that's been on any of his teams.
No, Randy, you can't say. Maybe Randy for the Vikings.
You could say Randy for the Vikings. That's going to be tough, though. Adrian Peterson has a claim.
I would put Adrian Peterson. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, Adrian Peterson has a claim.
Kevin Williams was a beast for a while, though. Nobody cares about a defensive tackle. John Randall.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. All right, so who else was on this list that we talked about? Yeah, so it's not Julio. It's not Megatron. Megatron is Megatron the best lion of all time? No, Barry Sanders.
No, it's Barry Sanders.
Yeah.
It's not. You can't say that about Marvin Harrison. It's obviously Peyton Manning for the Colts.
It's Peyton Manning. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can't say that about Antonio Brown and the Steelers. No way, no how.
No. Yeah, it is. You're right. It is Andre Johnson. Andre Johnson is the best.
Fitzgerald, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Huh.
I do think J.J. Watt is right there, honestly.
J.J. Watt has a claim to it, but I think that Andre Johnson's played more years with them. So, man, that's another good debate. Hey, Vish, hour 5 minutes. I need you to get back, and you need to start looking for a damn job and stop jumping on people's shows, including mine. All right?
No, I gotta come back. I will be back. If Jason Aponte invites me, I'll be back.
Andre Johnson was DeAndre Hopkins before Hopkins. The media and the way things are covered now is a lot different than ever before. Great show, guys. Jamal, thank you so much for the actual. Yeah, but he is. I appreciate that, and thank you for the donation. Appreciate you, Vish. Before we get out of here, man, we'll do this again when we get closer to camp and everything. Tell everybody where to follow you. Yeah, no, I know. Don't say it. Shh. Let's keep it under wraps because we want to pull up on the timeline and just act like we just.
Oh, you want it to be like that? Oh, that. But I also wanted to give my man Jamal a shout out. We might meet him.
Yeah,
I'll hit Jamal up, so we'll meet him.
Awesome, absolutely. So, so just let everybody know. I mean, everybody here probably already follows you everywhere, but just for the people who don't know who you are or where to find you, let everybody know.
Well, first, thank you for having me on. I love coming on with you. I always enjoy it. You're one of the best at what you do, so thank you for having me. But you can follow me on Twitter at Vish Kumaran. I tweet about a lot of things, random things. Sometimes I get angry on Twitter and tweet with a lot of force. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just tweet stuff, but I tweet. And then you can find me on YouTube for a little more measured takes. Blake and Vish Sports. I usually don't get this passionate because I usually don't take topics where I have kind of these weird takes like this receiver topic. I hope it was coherent and made sense. But Blake and Vish Sports on YouTube. And honestly, please subscribe to Jason Aponte. Please follow Jason Aponte 213 on Twitter. It is the best decision you will make.
No,
unless you go at Jason Aponte once, because he will bookmark you and find you. So don't make the mistake of going at Jason Aponte, but please subscribe and follow Jason Aponte. Best decision you can make. This dude is awesome.
Like, I appreciate you, Vish, and I love you, man. And you know that I feel the same way about you and everything. But I gotta stop doing that, man. I really do. Sometimes I see red sometimes because there's always that one person that's in my mentions always talking crazy that doesn't make any sense. That like I let it slide 9 times, but that one day that I wake up and I go through my bookmarks and I see it, I'm just like, you know what? Today's the day. I'm not in the mood, and that's it. So I mean, honestly, I wouldn't say that. Differing opinions are one thing, but that guy and those people, it's usually because you're coming at me disrespectful. Don't come at me disrespectful, and then when I go back at you, play victim, because if you can't stand the heat, stay your ass out the kitchen, man. Don't talk crazy to me, and then act like I can't talk crazy back, because when I do, I play for keeps. And I will bury your ass.
And that's what I was going to say. The problem is, I feel like they talk crazy in their first tweet. It's obvious. And then they come in and act like, wow, why is this dude being so crazy and calling me out? And they act like you're the crazy guy.
The amount of things you've called me. Yo, you're a jackass. What the hell do you know? You're stupid, blah, blah, blah. Bro, when I call you out and I'm just like, update, that's a problem, bro? Come on, man. You're like, I'm soft. Y'all are soft. And if I let it go 9 times, that means that I let it slide. I've been turning the other cheek. So, but I got to stop doing that, man, because I give too many people who put negative energy out there attention, and they should just be those people that like nobody interacts with. If you come talking crazy in my mentions, I'm gonna let you say whatever you want, because you're not gonna say that shit to me in real life, and it don't really matter, and it don't affect my pockets, so I don't really care in any way.
Yeah. Anyway, you should just think about the time where Jerick McKinnon played quarterback for the 49ers, that one auspicious wildcard play.
Y'all want to laugh? I ordered my Fred Warner jersey just like all of you guys did the same day, right? The same exact day. And I have not received an update on it at all. Like, it's just sitting there processing. I bought the Jerick McKinnon jersey as a joke. as a joke.
It's there.
It'll be here in 2 days. What? Can you please, Fanatics? Can somebody get me an update on my Fred Warner jersey, man? I just want it. I don't care what the patch looks like. I just want it. Like, there's too much discussion on patches.
I may or may not have a cousin that works at Fanatics that I might be able to ask him what the deal with all these jerseys are.
Vish, we're getting off this right now. We're gonna stop your job search and we're gonna get to that. But yes, please make sure that you follow Vish everywhere. Make sure that you subscribe to his channel because he does great work. It's not all 49er centric, but I love his perspective. And Blake is great as well too. Those guys really know what they're talking about. Blake is awesome, man. He is really good. It's just I want him to come on Twitter one day, but I know why he doesn't for the same reasons that I was just turning red in the face just a few seconds ago. So for Vish, for Jay, we'll see you guys soon.